Well, it was quite the interesting weekend for the LSU baseball team. For all the world, it looked like they needed to sweep the Ole Miss Rebels, and they didn't even, though their coach didn't even tell them they needed to do it. Now it's on to the SEC tournament and the Georgia Bulldogs on Tuesday morning. Question is, have they done enough to secure a berth in the NCAA tournament? Will they be playing in a regional 2 weeks from now, regardless of what they do on Tuesday? Will they have a long weekend in Hoover, which just about every LSU fan hopes they do? We'll get into all that, along with an interesting tidbit coming out of Saints camp this morning, as well as wishing a Saints legend a happy birthday. All next is LSU baseball beat writer Koki Riley joins us next on the Dattitude podcast.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.
Where you at, New Orleans? Monday morning. Hello to all my friends elsewhere, everywhere, out there who somehow managed to watch 3 full days of golf, LSU baseball, and the NBA playoffs all at the same time, and all without somehow pissing off your wife. Oh, wait. That's just me. What about you? You get to do all that? No watching 4 things at a time here, pal. No, you have all your focus on Dattitude, episode number 241, presented by Evangeline Securities for a Monday, May the 20th, 24. I am your host, Jim Derry. Whether you're watching on one of our NOLA.com social media channels or listen to the podcast, as always, I thank you for being a part of this show and for being a part of the Dattitude family. We want you to be a part of the show. We have Koki Riley coming up. We told you in the open. We're going to be talking mostly about LSU baseball this morning. Feel free to type in your comments or questions. Now, the interview with Koki was recorded this morning about an hour or so ago. So if you have a comment, feel free to talk about it. Put it up there. I will show it while Koki is on, but you can't ask him any questions because we already talked about it. He's on his way to Hoover, about to get going to Hoover this morning. So had to record it a little bit earlier than I would normally like to, because I'd like our guests to be a part of everything, but it is what it is. Just type in your comments, YouTube, X, whether you're watching on Facebook, doesn't matter. You can type them in. We'll show them here on the podcast. And if you're listening after the fact on any number of places, including wherever you get your podcasts on Apple, Google, Spotify, you can send in a comment to me at jderry@theadvocate.com. Reminder to subscribe to our growing Dattitude YouTube page. Take a second. Go find us on YouTube at Dattitude Pod. Click the little bell to receive notifications if you so choose when we go on the air live. All right. It has been an interesting weekend. Not a whole lot of news going around with the Saints. We are going to get to something in just a minute. Rocky is with us this morning. Says he still thinks LSU has to win 1, maybe 2 games in the SEC tournament to get in the NCAA. Maybe. It was a big weekend. Look, they had to sweep Ole Miss. There's no question about that. We get into that with Koki, and I just don't want for this LSU team to look back and say, man, I wish they had made that play 40 feet in front of home plate at Alabama weekend before last. If that comes back to roost, that's going to be a hard one to take, right? Because if they make that play and they're 14-16 in SEC play, and they're what? They'd be the 8 or 9 seed instead of being the 11 seed. I think it does make a difference. I think they are in, but they didn't. And I kind of agree with you, Rocky. Again, these are things that we talk about in the interview with Koki, but I do. I think I agree. I think they, at the bare minimum, I think they need to win Tuesday. Because look, Georgia's a good baseball team. They backed themselves into a corner. Chris Kennedy, go Tigers. Absolutely. Look, we want things to talk about going forward. We want this to go far. I found an interesting tidbit with the odds that I'm going to get into with Koki. We always talk about how we learn a lot from Las Vegas, and we do. There's no question. What Las Vegas thinks, you might not think it matters, but it does matter because they've been studying all this. They don't just put odds up willy-nilly. I thought it was interesting that before this weekend series against Ole Miss, LSU was just dumbly, stupidly, whatever word you want to use, they were 25-1 to win the College World Series. I thought that was incredibly low. I thought they should have been more like 50-1. Okay. And I kind of still think they ought to be 50 or 60-1, to be honest. But what I found interesting was, and we're going to show it in just a minute. You know what? I'll show it now while we're talking about it. But if you look at the World Series title odds now, they are plus 4,000. They've gone from plus 2,500 to plus 4,000 after they swept Ole Miss. So you think they'd stay the same or drop a little bit? No. I mean, I think odds makers realized that was just a dumb number. It was an unrealistic number. I mean, LSU still has to make it into a regional. We're talking about them potentially winning the College World Series. What would you put their odds on making it to a regional right now? If I had to put a number on it, I'd say it's about minus 110, which means even money. I think that's what it is right now. I think there's still even money to make the tournament because they're basically underdogs going into Tuesday's game against Georgia, the 6th seed, playing at 9:30 in the morning. LSU had to use a decent amount of pitchers over the weekend. I know Georgia did too. But LSU is the 11th seed and Georgia's the 6th seed for a reason. So if you take that into effect and LSU's a slight underdog going against Georgia, what do you put their odds on if they don't win this ball game? I think then it's less than even money. I really think they need to win this game. I think if they don't win this game, maybe it's 2-1 they don't make it. But again, an 11 seed. How many SEC teams are going to make the tournament? All things we get into with Koki a little bit. Before we talk about that, I do give me just a minute. I want to continue the story about my friends at Evangeline Securities. We've been talking about them the past few weeks, and I know there are so many people out there. This company can help you. You know that they're a company that can help you decide if it's the right time to sell your small to mid-sized business and what that business might be worth. Or maybe you don't know. Maybe this is the first time you've seen Dattitude or the first time you've seen us in a while. Evangeline Securities, the new title sponsor of the Dattitude podcast. Not only are there so few companies in Louisiana that can help you figure out the question of the future of your life, but there are none like Evangeline Securities. If you've been pondering the question of whether it's time to sell, whether there's been something on your mind for months or years, managing directors Nick Braden and Ron Hemelt came back to their hometown, New Orleans, from the Big Apple to help locals find solutions. And they do this with a complimentary service that includes a detailed assessment of what your business is worth, and then they will go through their findings with you. Think about that for a little bit before we continue explaining how Evangeline Securities can be the answer to the rest of your life. In the meantime, while you're listening or watching or both, the Dattitude, of course, you can visit them at www.evangelinesecurities.com. Okay, I do want to touch on the PGA Championship this morning. Mike says LSU's going back-to-back. Take it to the bank. Gabe's waving his hands no. Mike, I appreciate your enthusiasm and your optimism. The odds against this is a completely different team. I mean, do I need to go down the list? I mean, did you see what Paul Skeens did Friday at Wrigley Field against the Chicago Cubs? His second major league start, 6 no-hit innings. Incredible. He was much better than he was in his first game. You know, a lot of people ask me, do we think he's the next Steven Strasburg? I don't know. I mean, you don't want him to have that injury play career that Steven Strasburg's had. But I do think he's the next great young thing. 21 years old, 6 no-hit innings. You know how hard that is to do? You know how many pitchers pitch their entire careers and don't do that? Lots. Lots of pitchers who pitch for years and years never pitched 6 no-hit innings. Ton of them. So what he did was incredible. Chris says it was amazing. Look, I'm a Cubs fan. I hated it. But, it is what it is. PGA Championship, how many of you watched? I asked. For a while yesterday, it was really, for lack of a better word, boring. The early part of the final round at Valhalla, I was just really kind of disinterested. Part of it was because none of the golfers that I had winning the tournament and had put bets on were doing anything. But it ended up being exciting at the end. Bryson DeChambeau, that dude can hit the ball. And I got to say, I got to give him golf clap because I didn't expect him to be able to work his way back in there at the end. He was right there. He forced Xander Schauffele to make birdie on the final hole. And to Xander's credit, who had never won a major before, he did it. Xander Schauffele made that putt. He made the great approach shot to get himself to be able to make a 5 or 6 foot birdie putt. And Bryson DeChambeau, incredible. Victor Hovland, I'm a little disappointed that he wasn't able to get the birdie on number 18. Not just because I had Victor Hovland. I was, he makes a big run, and in the last 6 holes, he par. What about Colin Morikawa? Par is the first 10 holes before he finally bogeys one, and then could never get himself into it. A 2-time major winner. Disappointing. But congrats to Xander Schauffele for winning his first major PGA Championship. And, that's one thing about the PGA I think is different than other tournaments. I think the competition's maybe a little bit stronger overall. There are more people in the field for sure. Sometimes I think it's the hardest to win, even though the scores are higher, because I think it seems like down the stretch that it's usually a little bit closer. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't have any facts to back this up, what I'm saying right now, but I just, I find it interesting. We'll see what happens. U.S. Open's coming up next month, Father's Day weekend, and then, of course, the British Open. So we are halfway through the golf majors. Quite interesting there. We talked about Paul Skeens. What about from Saints camp? Again, this is the time of year where there's not going to be a lot going on. We're waiting for that June 1st day to come, and those post-June 1 cuts. We will have some interesting shows before I go on vacation. I'm about to I think I'm going to be gone from the 19th of June until like July 8th or something like that. I don't think I've completely finalized it. So we're going to have about 3 weeks off of Dattitude, but we're going to have some interesting shows leading up to before I go on vacation because of the June 1 thing. Doug Mouton's coming on the show on Wednesday. I don't know who my Friday guest is, but next week I'm really looking forward. We only have 2 shows because Memorial Day is on Monday. We won't have a show on Monday. But next week we're going to have Adam Chernoff is going to come on the show. And if you don't know who he is, I encourage you to go find. This guy is the in my opinion, and we've had him on the show before. If you remember when I was doing some NFL previews a couple of years ago, he would come on and tell me whether he thought I was right or whether I was wrong about my over-under win totals and whether I thought maybe a team was going to make the playoffs, the surprise teams I was high on. And but he has become, if not the premier handicapper, the way he dissects things, I don't know a handicapper that knows as much as he knows. He knows every offensive coordinator, every defensive coordinator. He goes through and tells you his preview on the Saints. He had a little mini preview on the Saints already. You can find him on YouTube. Just search for Adam Chernoff, or you can go to adamchernoff.com. And he dissected the Saints and why this Saints team will look better and whether it makes a difference on their number going forward. He's going to come on the show and break down what he said. And you will be interested. Even if you've never heard of Adam Chernoff and you're like, I promise you, it's going to be a segment next week. I think it's going to be Wednesday. It could be Wednesday or Friday. And I'm not sure, but he is going to come on next week and talk about that. So looking forward to that. Gabe Henderson sent me something this morning, a tweet from John Hendricks of SI, who said, Mickey Loomis said this morning that the Saints tried to re-sign Andrus Peat, but that he ultimately chose a fresh start. I find that interesting because we talked about this in the past couple of weeks about Andrus Peat, that we thought it was important for the Saints to sign him, but it's not all that surprising to me that if it was Andrus Pete's decision to move on and go on to the Las Vegas Raiders, why would you not? Remember last year, we're going into training camp and we didn't know what was going on with Pete. There was an injury, but then no one was asking the question, where's Andrus Pete? Why is he not practicing? Then they kind of went into the preseason and he's showing up, but still wasn't practicing a whole bunch. The Saints were forced to use him there. And I said this, and I compare Andrus Pete sort of a little bit to the Jameis Winston situation. I don't think they wanted to use him. I think they had to use him. Trevor Penning was that bad at left tackle that they were forced to try something. So they tried Andrus Pete at left tackle. Obviously, throughout his career, he's played left tackle and left guard, was a left tackle at Stanford. And it worked out. I mean, honestly, you could make an argument that Andrus Pete was the MVP of that offensive line last year. Now, they didn't go to the playoffs, obviously, but they're not 9-8 if it's not for Andrus Pete. If Andrus Pete was really hurt or wasn't on this team, James Hurst got hurt too. If Andrus Pete isn't there, this team is a 7-10 team, easily. That's how much I thought Andrus Pete meant to this team last year. Would he have done the same thing this year? I don't know. Would he have been as important to this team this year? I don't know. He's going to be a backup with the Raiders most likely, but the point is I don't blame him for wanting to leave. I mean, how could you want to stay in New Orleans when it didn't look like the team was committed to you? It's the same reason why I didn't understand why Jameis Winston wanted to stay. I mean, I didn't know why the Saints wanted him to stay. They were paying him $8 million last year. Didn't make any sense to me. So I don't know. I think where the Saints are right now, we know that it's still early. It's May 20th. There are still free agents that are able to be signed. There are going to be some moves made again, June 1, post-June 1 cuts. Will Marshawn Lattimore be a part of this team? When you talk about offensive line, we don't know what the Saints O-line is going to look like. We have no idea. I mean, I don't know. I mean, where is Fuanga going to play? Is he going to play right tackle? Is he going to play left tackle? Are they going to go sign someone that can play right tackle and move? I mean, ideally, you'd like to sign someone that can play left tackle, a veteran who can play left tackle. So you can leave Fuanga at his native right tackle. He's been working out at both throughout training camp. We've seen that training camp, throughout mini camp, the little bit that he's done so far. So mini camps coming up, more mini camps, OTAs. Got a lot going on over the course of the next couple months before we get to training camp. Just 2 months away. It is just 2 months away to the start of training camp. A little bit more over 2 months. But this might be, I don't know that training camp is ever super interesting, but this is certainly one we're going to be looking at. And obviously, we're going to be looking at it from afar because the Saints are going to be practicing in California. Our guys will be out there. You'll be up to date on it. They'll be coming on this show at some point, I'm sure. So, all right. Rest of the show as we kind of switch a little bit. My extra point this afternoon. It's almost this afternoon. Archie Manning. The great Archie Manning. Turning 75 years old. He actually turned 75 yesterday. I've got a lot to say about that. I'm biased when it comes to number 8 because when I was growing up, he was the one, man. He was the one. Rocky says Andrus Pete should have been respected a little more highly. Absolutely, Rocky. And that's part of the problem I have with this staff. I don't know that I saw. I mean, we can go through. We could spend a whole show on the differences between Sean Payton and Dennis Allen. Not going to sit here and there'll be plenty of time to get on Dennis Allen when the regular season starts. If it starts like I think it's going to start, we're going to have Wednesday. We're going to spend Wednesday going through with Doug Mouton about maybe we'll break down game per game. I don't know. Or maybe we'll just talk about what we think of the schedule again. I don't know. I don't know where the show's going to take us on Wednesday. I'm not going to bash Dennis Allen today, but one of the major differences between Sean Payton and Dennis Allen is Sean Payton wouldn't have done with what happened to Jameis Winston last year. There would have never been that situation. First of all, Jameis Winston would have started a couple games, good or bad. You could say, oh, I'm glad he didn't play. I mean, but maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But I promise you that Andrews Pete would have been way more involved with this team earlier on in the season. Way more involved. I didn't like the way they handled the situation. There's a lot of things I don't like the way they handle. And I think it came back to bite him. And it came back to bite him when Andrews Pete signed with the Las Vegas Raiders. Say what you want. Chris, real talk. Thank you. I mean, that's what the show is. I tell it the way it is, or at least the way that I think it is. All right, let's get into the LSU Tigers. And Koki Riley, again, this morning, we recorded this about an hour and a half ago, as Koki is on his way to Hoover. And we get into whether, A, Koki thinks that LSU is in regardless of what happens on Tuesday, whether they need to win 1, 2, 3 games, what do they need to do? He tells me, you know, I knew all about RPI, but I didn't know anything about KPI. Had never heard of it before. Well, he gets into why that's important. And talking about that, Jay Johnson said it in the open. He knew they needed to win all 3 games against Ole Miss, but he didn't tell his team that. I thought that was the way to go. I mean, you know, the old cliche of we take them 1 game at a time. Yeah, maybe in the grand scheme of things, they take them 1 game at a time, but let's be realistic. Coaches don't take anything 1 game at a time. No good coach does anyway. I mean, they know what's ahead of them. They know what they need to do. And I think in this case, Jay Johnson knew that they needed to sweep, and they did. And you got to give it to the Tigers because after, you know, losing 2 games in Alabama the weekend before, where they certainly should have won the Friday game and then lost the Sunday game, had a chance to win that one too. If they just win one of those, it's probably a different story right now, but it isn't. That's where we are. So let's hear what Koki thinks. And when we come back, let's see, before we do that, I'll show Dylan's comment here. Tigers got the sweep for me against the Rebel Sharks. Ole Miss isn't in. They better not sneak in. Ole Miss is done. That's what you're worried about. All right, let's get into Koki, and when we come back, we'll wrap it up and have the extra point for you here on Dattitude on this Monday morning. Welcoming into the Dattitude podcast this Monday morning, presented to you by Evangeline Securities, is our friend Koki Riley, who covers the LSU baseball Tigers for The Advocate, the Times-Picayune, and NOLA.com here. What is going on this morning, Koki? I know you got a lot going on, about ready to head to Hoover, and an exciting drive just to Hoover this morning. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a thrilling drive to Hoover, Alabama. All 5.5, 6 hours of it. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of LSU baseball, a lot of, you know, RPI and KPI numbers fly into my head, a lot of resumes to look at, and we can break it all down right here.
You know, one thing is people might not understand the joys or sometimes lack thereof of a beat writer, and especially I find baseball is the most interesting because I've also done conference baseball tournaments, and you don't know whether you're going to be there one day or be there for 5 or 6 really, really long days.
Yeah. No, I mean, Omaha was kind of the extreme example of it last year when I covered it for another paper. I mean, I didn't know if I was going to be there for 4 or 5 days or 2 whole weeks, and we ended up being there for 2 whole weeks, and it was very entertaining, very fun, and a lot of work. So paid off in the end, obviously, because they won the whole thing, and
right.
You know, and that's and that's always more interesting as a writer, as a reporter, but it was still a lot on the brain as well. So.
Well, one thing, Koki, is you knew that team last year had a real chance to make a run. So I guess you had kind of mentally prepared that, hey, this could be a long journey. We don't really know still, and it's a great weekend. We're going to get into that right off the bat here, but we don't know what this team really is, because if you look at the beginning of the season, looked like, hey, this could be the defending champion making another run. Then they go through a month and a half of just floundering around looking like one of the worst teams in the SEC. And now we've been through 5 weeks of this team is looking like the team that we thought they were in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, if you boil things down like that, I don't have a ton to quibble with, if I'm being totally honest with you. They have played a lot better baseball in the last about month or so, last 20-ish games or so. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the pitching and the fact that this pitching staff was the thing that this team was built on at the very beginning of the season. It was the thing that we talked about throughout the entire preseason and the early part of the year when they were beating up on non-conference teams. And then once conference play started, it really struggled. The starting pitching wasn't as good as we thought it would be, even though I don't think it was the main issue. And the main issue ended up being the bullpen, which pitching depth was supposed to be the calling card for this team, and it just wasn't there. And as the offense has kind of gone up and down throughout the whole season, and really even this past weekend, it was a bit up and down. The pitching staff has started to level out, and when you have guys like Christian Little and Gavin Guidry sort of find their form in the second half of the year, like that really makes a huge difference.
Well, let's get into right of the crux of the matter. Again, we're going to talk about the development of this team over the course of the next 15 minutes or so. But do you think going into Tuesday morning's game, and that's a really early game, 9:30 a.m., do you think going into Tuesday that LSU has to win against Georgia to solidify a regional berth, or do you think that they've done enough?
It's a tough question to answer. Mainly because when you look at LSU's resume and you look at the other 13 and 17 teams in conference play, there's 5 of them this year in the SEC, which is crazy. When you look at their resumes compared to other non-conference bubble teams, it's not even close. Like the SEC teams are much better in terms of RPI, in terms of KPI, which is another slightly more advanced metric that sort of places all these teams next to each other across the country. And you look at, quality of wins, strength of schedule, all these sort of things that you look at, and all these SEC teams are ahead. The problem is there's never been 11 SEC teams that have made the NCAA tournament. 11 teams have never come out of one conference to make the tournament in the same year. And right now, I would say LSU is kind of undeniably, or it's really hard to make a case that LSU isn't the number 11 team of those 11 teams. So LSU's resume is ahead of the other non-conference teams, but it isn't ahead of the other SEC teams. So if you want to get ahead of the other SEC teams, you win 2 of these games in the SEC tournament. You beat a team like Georgia, and you beat a team maybe like Kentucky, for example, which would be the next team they would play if they were to win tomorrow. And then all of a sudden your RPI shoots up even more. Your resume looks a lot more stronger, and the other teams you're competing for, who are also 13 and 17 and who may be ahead of you right now, they will start to plummet a little bit because they're facing each other. Like Alabama's facing South Carolina, and Vanderbilt is facing Florida. So someone's going to lose. That two teams are going to lose out of that, and they won't have a chance to build on their resumes. Personally, I think that all 11 teams deserve to get in, but will that actually happen? I don't know. And you don't want to put yourself in that sort of awkward position if you lose on Tuesday. So that's why I still think Tuesday's game is pretty important, even if we're not sure how important it is exactly, because we don't know what's going through the committee's head.
And I'm going to ask you to do something that's absolutely impossible, what I'm going to ask you to do anyway. Put your mind in the head of a committee member. And how much do you think that the fact that LSU not only is the defending national champion, but the fact that they're LSU, which is basically, to me at this point, the same as Alabama in football, how much do you think that factors in the fact that they have this brand name? And let's be honest, people who watch college baseball are going to want it, the casual fan is going to want to see LSU in there. Somebody that's going to have a regional, whether it be out west or somewhere else, doesn't want LSU in their bracket, but otherwise, college baseball fans in general want LSU there. You think that weighs in?
We'll see. I mean, potentially, there's definitely a strong case for that. But I also want to bring up 2 sort of historical precedents where LSU has been in this spot before. Like, this isn't new territory. I mean, 2011 team that had I actually spoke with Palmieri right after Saturday's game, and he talked about how the 2011 team had almost a top 20 RPI or around 20. also had the same exact overall record, the same exact conference record as this LSU team does, and that team missed the tournament. He believed that there was an SEC bias against LSU that ended up hurting LSU that year when it came to the committee. Wrote about that more in detail in a story that's up on theadvocate.com and NOLA.com right now. But there's also the flip side of that in the 2021 team that also had a 13-17 conference record that snuck into the tournament. So we have examples of we have two very similar examples of where LSU is in right now, and it going completely one way or completely the other. So I think it kind of like further pushes the fact that this game's important, and if they want to like really secure their spot, they win one or two games this weekend.
I don't know the answer to this as I ask you, and you may not know it either. So I'm kind of put you on the spot here, but that 2011 team. One thing about this LSU team, and you see the scores on the screen, how they swept Ole Miss when I think they absolutely had to. I think if they don't sweep Ole Miss, they're in a world of hurt, and not only need to, I don't even know, would they have gotten the 11 seed had they not swept Ole Miss? One out against Ole Miss.
They would have gotten the 11 seed still.
Okay, so but still to go 3-3 over your last two series is a lot different than going 4-2, including a sweep, even though you won 4 out of 5. But what was that 2011 team? Do you know how they finished the season? Did they finish the season as strong as this one? Because, frankly, winning 4 out of 5 SEC series to me also is another thing. I know in basketball they certainly look at that, how you're going when it comes to tournament time. And so I think winning 4 out of 5 series also plays a role.
Yeah, potentially. And with that 2011 team, they finished their last 12 games at 9-3.
Okay. So very similar to this one.
Yeah. I mean, that team had a slow start in conference play. That team had impressive wins, series wins in the non-conference play. They swept Cal State Fullerton. They swept Wake Forest. Those were good teams at the time, and they still missed. So things have changed since 2010. That year, the SEC tournament only had 8 teams, and they didn't make the SEC tournament, and that ended up being kind of their downfalls because the committee could just say, "Oh, well, you didn't make the SEC tournament, so that's why we're not going to put you in." So, we're going to see how all this shakes out now in 2024, and if things have changed, and if there's an SEC bias or not an SEC bias, and all these things that we cannot figure out unless we're literally in the minds of these committee members.
Koki Riley here with us on the Dattitude podcast this Monday morning, presented to you by Evangeline Securities. Look, I think it's one thing, and I'm not saying that LSU is definitely in or definitely out, but I do think that the tournament is a little bit different today because I do think that there's actually more eyes on college baseball today than there were in 2011. I think that it's continually grown, especially over the past 5 to 7 years. I think college baseball has grown tremendously, and I think that's actually helped by the fact that softball's growing tremendously. I just think that these spring sports, so with that being the case and the fact that there are 11 teams in the SEC tournament now, I do think that makes a difference. Well, I guess we'll find out and see, but I think there are more eyes actually going to watch this SEC tournament than maybe 13 years ago. Yeah,
we'll see. And I think you make an interesting point about just the growth of college baseball and college softball. I mean, obviously LSU had Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz last season, and that made them probably the most recognizable team in college baseball last year, since there were MLB eyes on that team, and plenty of them, as we see with Paul Skeens now with the Pirates. So, it'll be interesting to see how that all sort of shakes out. But I still think they could, if they made a run in the SEC tournament, and even if they hadn't have swept Ole Miss, I think they would have been able to sort of play their way in, but the stakes would have been even higher at the SEC tournament, because again, you'd only have 12 conference wins and not 13.
As a Cubs fan, I wish Paul Skeens would have waited like another week before he came up. That's a whole different story for another show, I guess. If you look at this RPI number, and you talk about KPI, I don't even know, I've never heard of that. You explained it nicely, but The RPI of 30, their record against top 50 teams is 18-18, nothing spectacular. Where does this measure up with some of the other teams that are on the bubble?
Yeah, when you look at the other non-conference teams in the bubble, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but they're just way ahead of these teams in terms of RPI, in terms of KPI, which is a metric that basically it looks a lot like RPI, but at the same, but it values a quality of win or quality of loss a lot more. So say you beat a good team by 10 runs, you're going to get a big boost for that. Say you lose to a top team on the roads, like so when they got swept by Tennessee, which was the number 1 team in the country at that point, they didn't lose any. They weren't penalized for that series at all, like because they were all close losses on the road against the number 1 team in the country. So when you sort of factor all that stuff in, LSU's KPI is at 21 in the country, which is much better than its RPI. And the only team outside of a power conference that's ahead of them in KPI right now is Coastal Carolina. So that kind of gives you an idea of like, all right, so all those other teams that are kind of on the bubble from these non-major conferences or even from these other conferences aren't ahead of them in KPI, and almost all of them aren't ahead of them in RPI. I think Northeastern's really the only one, and Northeastern might not even be a bubble team because they played good baseball to end this season. But Maryland's behind them. Illinois has put on a good charge at the end of this season, the Big Ten, and they're behind them in RPI or with these other metrics, quad 1 wins. These are sort of terminology you hear in college basketball, right? And you can use a lot of them with college baseball. So when you look at all these metrics and you look at some of these other teams that they're quote unquote competing against, at least LSU is kind of undeniably ahead of all of them. And I can say the same exact thing about Vanderbilt and Alabama and South Carolina and Florida as well. So it's just going to come down to the willingness of the committee to put in 11 teams from the SEC. If they're willing to do that, then this SEC tournament just isn't that important for pretty much all of these teams, including LSU. But if they're not willing to do that, then you got to win 2 games here.
What if you lose to one of those aforementioned teams because you can't field a ground ball that's 40 feet in front of the plate? That doesn't really help. Here's the thing, like if they just win that Alabama game or they win that Florida game when they were a strike away from winning that one too, or an out away at least, or win that Vanderbilt game when they had a 2-run lead in the 8th inning, we're not talking about this at all. Like they're in. They're more firmly in. Like the SEC tournament becomes, almost a seeding exercise for them because they're at 14 conference wins or they're at 15 conference wins. And even if their metrics would have been stronger because, it's a series win against Florida or a series win against Alabama. And the Alabama series would have been huge because that's on the road and that team is higher in RPI than Florida or Vanderbilt. So and that Florida and Vanderbilt games were just at home. So like the Alabama loss out of all of them stings the most. Yeah, I was going to say, I joke about that play, but seriously, if LSU doesn't make the tournament, they can look back to that one play. I mean, when you talk about 56 games throughout the course of a season, it'll be 57 on Tuesday. But you go throughout the course of an entire season, if you don't make the tournament, is because you couldn't make one play right in front of the plate. Because I agree. I think if they make that play, then they've won 5 consecutive SEC baseball series, including a couple of them against teams in this tournament, and a few of them. And now you're staring the difference between 13 and 17 and 14 and 16, and it makes a world of difference. Yeah,
and they were a strike away multiple times that inning, even before that play, right? And they were 2 outs, nobody on, and you had your best reliever in the game. And guys are human, and sometimes they don't come. Right. And sometimes even like Mariano Rivera blew Game 7 of the World Series. Just think about that, right?
I'm not saying I'm not getting at him for it.
Absolutely, I know you're not, but I'm just telling you that's like sometimes that's the reality of baseball, and stuff like that has happened to them this season a few times. And I think the Alabama game's the thing that jumps out to you the most. And they had opportunities to, win that game by more runs before that. Like Tommy White missed third base, rounding third on his way home. And maybe that turns into a bit bigger inning, and maybe they win by 6. It's this. So there's been a lot of that sort of stuff going on with them against teams that have been around their level this season. And that's if you add in like the Florida series and the Vanderbilt series as well. Not saying like if they get a couple breaks, they beat Arkansas and Tennessee. I'm not saying that at all, but I do think that luck's been an interesting factor this year, and just not finishing out games through their bullpen has been maybe one of the biggest, if not the biggest factor this season as to where they are right now. But heck, they still have a chance, and they still have a pretty good one.
I found Jay Johnson's comments Sunday afternoon very interesting about how he knew that they had to sweep the series, but he didn't tell the team that. And so I found that super interesting, and just the way that he viewed it. And he may view that the Georgia game is the same way and not tell them, but the fact that he just told them to focus and got them to do that. And the big names came out to play, especially on Saturday. I thought it just said a whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tommy White is absolutely on fire right now. He went 8-13 this past series. He had 3 home runs. He had the first grand slam they've had in conference play. He was absolutely wonderful. And when you got guys like that playing loose and free and just being absolutely on fire, like that's what this offense needs. That's what this team needs. And combine that with the way their bullpen is pitching. I mentioned Christian Little. We've talked about Griffin Herring and his one blip on the radar this season. But other than that, he's been amazing this year. And there's really not a lot you can pick out with him. And you have a guy like Gavin Goodry who's pitching a lot better. You have a guy like Nate Ackenhausen who you can throw out there as another lefty. Fidel Ulloa has came up big in that last game for them, gave them 2 innings of scoreless baseball. You look at all that and you combine it with the fact that they have one of the better 1-2 punches in the starting rotation in the entire SEC. I mean, among teammates and starters in the SEC who've thrown at least 50 innings this season. Jump and Holman are one of only 2 combos to have ERAs in conference play at below 4.6. And that kind of shows you the fact that they kind of have something rare, and that they have 2 reliable guys at the top of their rotation that they can go to in a bullpen that's improving. So when you combine all these sort of things that have sort of happened to them lately, especially with the pitching staff, that's how they sweep Ole Miss. That's how they come this close to beating Alabama, and then they beat Missouri, obviously, Auburn, obviously, and then the really, really big one, which was taking 2 out of 3 against Texas A&M. I mean, we're not here if they don't do that. And that really helped out their RPI, especially because, again, Texas A&M, that's a top 5 team in the country at pretty much whatever you look at. So that series victory really, really propelled them as to where they are right now.
There's a couple more questions here real quick, but one, if they are able to win on Tuesday, how do you think that this pitching staff lines up to be able to play a long tournament? Obviously, last year, one thing that benefited LSU, and they were, they went into really the regionals. Okay, fine, you don't have to play as many games, but going into the College World Series, we didn't know how the pitching would hold up. And you talked about Ackenhausen and Guidry, who played big roles in that World Series last year. But as a whole, to be able to make a run, if they do need to make a run throughout this SEC tournament, do they have enough pitching to be able to throw a bunch of guys out there and be effective?
I'm a little bit more optimistic of that now than I was, say, even 2 or 3 weeks ago, just because of the way they've pitched lately, and a couple of different guys stepping up. And I think the fact that they're pitching in a pitcher's park is going to help them out here. But it's going to be hard because they're playing on Tuesday. They haven't done that yet in the Jay Johnson era. But I also think that Gage Jump, there's a real shot that he starts this game because he only threw 83 pitches on his start on Thursday because of the weather delay, cut his start short. So he'll be going into this game on 4 days rest. I think even though Jay Johnson says that this team's locked into the NCAA tournament, I still think that he knows that this game is pretty important. And if you can get one of your top two guys in there to start this game, it gives you a massive advantage over Georgia, which probably is going to have that sort of cushion heading into this game with their pitching staff. And, one of the weaknesses with Georgia is their lack of pitching depth. And if you want to make a run this tournament, you have to win this game because it's the first day is a single elimination format. Once they do that, they'll play Kentucky on Wednesday, most likely. They won't have one of their top two guys, and it's going to be a tough game to win, if I'm being totally honest with you. But they would have Luke Holman theoretically available for a Thursday start because he would have, 5 or 6 days of rest.
Right.
So obviously we don't know who they would play in that theoretical Thursday game, but that's sort of the plan, at least with the pitching. And I think Griffin Herring and Christian Little would be available for this Tuesday game if it were close. If they really wanted to, if they were at least within striking distance and wanted to see how things would work out. So I Herring pitched twice this past weekend, Little pitched twice and was warming up for a third appearance this past weekend. Guidry pitched twice and Ackenhausen pitched twice. So those guys pitched a good bit this past weekend, but none of them really threw more than, I want to say 30 pitches in any single outing. So I think that those guys should be fairly fresh heading into this week. So maybe they can, push the limit with those guys a little bit. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see just like how a lot of that's going to, again, depend on how important Jay Johnson thinks this week, I should say, really is.
Wrapping up with Koki Riley here this Monday morning on Dattitude. Georgia, they have not played this season. How do you think they match up with the Bulldogs? And what's this game going to come down to, do you think?
Yeah, so Georgia has the best player in the country, and Charlie Condon. He's probably going to be the number one pick in the draft. At least he deserves to be. He has 35 home runs this season. He's been an absolute monster at the plate for the Bulldogs, and that's what this Georgia team does. It mashes home runs, and I think what will help LSU potentially in this game is the fact that they're playing in a pitcher's park. So some of those home runs are just going to turn to lazy flyouts, and I think that could really help them against this really offensive-oriented team when everyone's sort of low on pitching. And that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of the SEC tournament games are low scores, despite the fact that everyone's running low on pitching because of that ballpark. So that could help them potentially, and that also could potentially help Georgia's pitching staff, which isn't a very deep unit. It's kind of Johnny Hole staff, but their manager is Wes Johnson, who was obviously LSU's pitching coach last season, who was a major league pitching coach for the Minnesota Twins. The guy knows pitching, and he's done a really good job of sort of piecing things together when it comes to the pitching. But they've also shown some cracks in the armor this season when it comes to their pitching staff. 19 runs they gave up against Florida in that last game of their series, which kind of shows you that was, again, third game in 3 games of that series, and they couldn't hold down Florida at all. So what are they going to look like on 2 days rest in a midweek game, which is pretty much a midweek game? We'll see, and it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I think LSU probably has their pitching better lined up if I had to guess.
Well, you kind of jumped ahead on my last question there, but I think LSU has to win this game. I really do. And because of all the things you said and being an 11 seed, and I think that it does matter. I don't think 11 SEC teams are going to get in. I think that 30 is a great RPI, and you talk about KPI that I really didn't know a whole lot about before. But, the odds makers, I always like to throw in what the odds makers do. And LSU's College World Series chances were plus 2,500, which meant 25-1 before this past weekend. They sweep, and it goes from 25-1 to 40-1. It goes up. So I think Vegas thinks that they need to get in as well. But
that's interesting.
It is, and Vegas tells a lot of the story, and people don't look at that. But with that being said, so you think that LSU, if you were, you think they have a good chance to win on Tuesday?
It's hard to say good.
Words in your mouth. What do you?
Yeah, it's just hard to say good because, again, it's baseball. You never totally know. Georgia has been objectively the better team so far this season. They're 17-13 in conference play for a reason. Yeah. Objectively, the better team. They've been 17-13 in conference play for a reason. I also think that I also think that LSU's pitching lines up better in this game. So it's gonna be really interesting. I'll just say this though, I am a little bit more optimistic that the committee will put in 11 teams than you are. Okay. I guess to say not to create some massive heated debate, but
that's a whole different show.
Yeah, this isn't First Take. I just think that if the committee's looking at these metrics, not just RPI, but now they've included KPI as part of some of the things that they look at, when they see that 11 of the top 23 teams in KPI are SEC teams, and they are the 11 SEC teams that we were talking about. When they look at 11 of the top 30 teams in RPI or SEC teams, and these are the things that they explicitly said that they are looking at, it's just hard to say that, oh, we're just going to flip against that now, especially when they can't even make the excuse that, these teams didn't make their own conference tournament, so how can we put them in the NCAA tournament, right? So, I mean, we'll see. There's precedent for that going the other way. There was a Kentucky team, I believe, in 2018 that had the same conference record as LSU and made the SEC tournament and lost in the first round. They didn't get in. That was in 2018. So we'll see if things have changed since then. But you also just look at really the direction of college sports, right? And the fact that these major conferences are just getting more and more power. And at some point, the committee's going to have to put in 11 SEC teams when you have Texas and Oklahoma in there as well, right? And when everyone's going to make the SEC tournament starting next year. So I'm just really fascinated to see how they sort of treat this case and where they view a team like LSU, which is kind of the 11th team of 11 right now, to make the NCAA tournament.
Well, LSU fans would just prefer if they just go out and win on Tuesday and make it a moot point, because I do think I think if they win on Tuesday, it's over. I do think that they've locked up a bit if they can win on Tuesday. And
I think they would need to win 2 to lock up a bit, if I'm being really nitpicky here, because say if Florida loses and say that LSU beats Georgia, I don't know if it automatically puts LSU ahead of Georgia. Okay. I think it makes it a lot closer. But if they win 2 games, then I think it's kind of undeniable, because I don't even the teams that beat, say, Alabama and Florida win, then it wouldn't be guaranteed that they would win another game, right, in the SEC tournament. So but if you win 2, it's really hard to argue. It then makes it almost impossible to argue against LSU, not putting LSU in the tournament.
Well, let's just hope you have a long week in Hoover. How about that?
Right. Yeah, if you're an LSU fan, you hope I'm there as long as humanly possible. So
just be ready. The weather's supposed to be good. It's just supposed to be very warm. At least you're playing at 9:30 in the morning. Koki Riley, thank you so much for taking time to join us here on Dattitude. And who knows? Maybe you're covering this for another month. Who knows?
Exactly. Who knows? They have the talent to do it. Let's see if they do it.
We'll talk to you soon. Safe travels, and hopefully we'll have you on again to talk about the excitement of LSU baseball.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
I would toot my own horn for a second. One thing that's great about this show, not only on our own platform, we have some great shows on our platform. The LSU Insider Podcast, which Koki is a part of, runs. We have that's a specialized show. We have the Saints Insider Podcast. That show runs on our platform here. Those are specialized shows. And one thing that we're able to do here at Dattitude, not only that you get my opinion on everything, and maybe we don't share as much opinion on some other shows, but I think just across the entire world of South Louisiana sports, maybe Louisiana sports in general, is that we talk about it all here in Dattitude. So, and the fact that we have this wide array of sports writers and here on our own platform to help bring out everything here, just saying, I'm biased. You're not going to get that at other places. You're really not. So that's why you come to Dattitude. And, of course, sometimes you want to hear me spout off about DA or Derek Carr or whatever other. Why do you want to listen to me when things are negative more? I find that interesting as well. When things are bad, you guys listen to me more than when they're good. I mean, when they're good, I tell you they're good. You don't want to hear me say they're good. You just want to hear me spout off. LSU right now is good. Koki tells you that. Look, whether they've done enough to get into the tournament already, I don't know that we know the answer to that. We don't know the answer to that. But we're going to find out pretty soon. Are they going to beat Georgia? I don't know. It really is a tough matchup. But I will say this. They win tomorrow, Tuesday. And I'm saying tomorrow because I don't know when you're going to watch this. But if they win Tuesday morning, I think they're in. Koki says maybe not. Rocky says Thatcher Hurd has got to show up at some point. I think there's more than Thatcher Hurd. Tommy Tank's got to keep doing what he's been doing. That's for sure. So big game tomorrow or Tuesday morning, 9:30 a.m. LSU versus Georgia, the 6 versus the 11. LSU not used to be in the 11, that's for sure. And then if they win that game, by the way, they would play Kentucky, third seeded Kentucky, Wednesday morning while we're doing this show. So we will certainly, that would be something to watch. But Doug Mouton coming on Wednesday. If LSU's playing, and we hope they are, we'll be talking about that, giving you updates during the podcast. We'll have it up here. I'll have it up on my screen over. You can't see my screen. You don't want to see my screen. It's black right now. Anyway, there's nothing on it. But we will be updating you on Wednesday if LSU is playing Kentucky while we do the show. Doug and I will be talking about that. But we're going to be spending a lot of time Wednesday talking about the Saints. And I want to get Doug's opinion on where he thinks this team is. If he thinks the schedule is as brutal early on as I do, does he think that the Saints can come back if they do have a rough start? Maybe they won't have a rough start. Maybe it's a moot point. Maybe they'll be better than we think they're going to be. Maybe they'll start 3-3 and be competitive, real competitive in some of the games I think they might lose. Maybe they'll beat Atlanta on the road early. Maybe they'll beat Dallas on the road early. Maybe they'll be 4-2. Then I think it's one hell of a season. If this team starts out 4-2 with this schedule, with what happens after, and they gain all that confidence against those teams, it could be a positive. So we'll see. Before we get to today's extra point and then later close out the show very, very shortly now, I want to give me a second. I want you to listen to this because I know there are a lot of people out there in this situation. And I like to say, even if you know someone in this situation, about how Evangeline Securities can help you figure out the rest of your life. If you're even thinking about it, selling your small to mid-sized business. Again, if you even know someone who is, you want to hear this. We told you earlier in the show, and we've told you for the past several weeks now, about how managing directors Nick Braden and Ron Hemelt are ready and waiting to put together a complimentary detailed assessment on what your business is worth. After they do this, and if you decide to proceed, they don't make a cent until the end. Okay? So keep that in mind. They will begin an extensive auction process among established private equity funds from across the world. Not just us Yats, not just here in New Orleans, not just Southern Louisiana, across the world. They will maximize the return process for the founder of your company and the founder's family. And if you so choose to do your Houdat dance down from the terrace to gate C, no one's going to object. Evangeline Securities is the top producer on their platform. There are very few companies like Evangeline in this area, and none with their dedication and success for the people they so care about here in the New Orleans area and in South Louisiana. Remember, that's why they came home from New York. Two Jesuit guys who went to business schools, some of the top business schools in the country. They came back home to New Orleans after they went to New York because they want to help the people here in South Louisiana. They are fully licensed and ready to serve you. So before you make your plans for the fall and them New Orleans Saints, you have plenty of time to talk to Nick and Ron about what is really important. That is the rest of your life. Visit our friends at www.evangelinesecurities.com. Okay, it is time For the extra point, happy birthday. We're not going to sing. You don't want to hear me sing. Not today. But for today's extra point, we celebrate the birthday of quite possibly my favorite all-time football player, not just for the Saints. Being in this business for as long as I have, I don't really get fired up anymore about meeting anyone, any special person. If I met, I don't know, I have not met LeBron James. I did, so what? I mean, I would talk to him like I talk to anybody. Pat Mahomes, great. Whoever. Maybe Tiger Woods might be a little different. But throughout my career, I've been fortunate enough to talk to people like Dean Smith outside the North Carolina locker room immediately after they won the 1993 national championship. Yes, I'm that old. I spent 4 days in Indianapolis covering a regional where Bobby Knight's Indiana Hoosiers were the number 1 seed. And I've been in a post-game press conference with Michael Jordan near the end of his illustrious NBA career. I have interviewed hundreds of NFL players and coaches, including obviously Drew Brees, had multiple one-on-ones with Sean Payton, covered the prep careers of Leonard Fournette, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson, among many others. I was on the field when LSU wrapped up its 3rd national championship in football against Ohio State in January 2008, and just off of it when the infamous no call happened. Yes, I brought that up again. But I never felt like I did in late 1990, when as a young pup covering a prep basketball game that featured Peyton Manning as a sophomore at Newman. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the eventual NFL Hall of Famer. Rather, his dad, Archie Manning, was there that night. And I remember thinking, wow, this might be the coolest moment of my life. Of course, I was only 22 years old. And I had no idea at the time I would have the privilege of writing and talking about sports for the majority of my life. Elisha Archibald Manning III was my favorite player in any sport when I was growing up, and only Roger Staubach was even close. The Saints stunk. Imagine being a fan of last year's Carolina Panthers over and over again for the first 18 years of your life. Literally, the only good thing for a Saints fan in those days was watching Archie play. Imagine Patrick Mahomes on a really crappy team. It might sound silly or even blasphemous, but I'm telling you that Archie was that good. The problem, obviously, is he had little to no talent around him, except for maybe in 1978 and 1979, when he was named NFC Offensive Player of the Year in 78 for a team that went 7-9, which was the best season the Saints had ever had at that point. The team was so bad that they rarely were on TV for home games, and usually had to listen to the late, great Wayne Mack on the radio, who would open each Saints first series with, "And here comes the redhead from Drew, Mississippi." One of the greatest travesties in sports history, in my biased opinion, is that Archie never got to play for a decent football team. He passed for just shy of 24,000 yards and rushed for 2,200 more, mostly because his porous offensive lines had him running for his life. Archie says he never held it against Bum Phillips for trading him away from New Orleans in 1982, but I sure did. I'm not ashamed to admit I openly wept as a 14-year-old little hoodat and cursed the soul of Bum when he shipped Archie to the lowly Oilers for a washed-up tackle named Leon Gray, who would never even start a game in New Orleans. On that day when Peyton and Cooper were playing for the Greenies nearly 34 years ago, I never had the courage to talk to Archie except to say hello, after which he returned the greeting. Maybe one day I can have him on the show, reminisce about the old days, and tell him what he meant to me as my love of sports began to take shape. But today, I simply say, happy 75th birthday to the redhead from Drew, Mississippi. The NFL world will say thank you for giving us Peyton and Eli, and I say thank you for being the only shining star in a decade's worth of horrendously bad football teams, and for being an ambassador from my hometown. That is going to wrap it up for this Monday. I want to thank today's guest, of course, Koki Riley, as he gets set to travel to Hoover, Alabama for hopefully a week's worth of SEC tournament baseball games. And, of course, the great Gabe Henderson behind the scenes, screening comments, giving me up-to-date info as he always does. We hope you can join us on Wednesday when we will welcome in WWL TV sports director Doug Mouton to talk more about the LSU baseball team. Again, if they win Tuesday, they're playing live while we're on the air here Wednesday, and we will keep you up to date with everything that's going on. Tell you what we think their chances are. Obviously, the chances are much better if they win Tuesday. We will also spend most of the show, of course, talking about the New Orleans Saints and get his thoughts. Again, programming note, there will be no show next Monday as we take off to celebrate Memorial Day. So next week, so we'll have Wednesday and Friday this week, Wednesday and Friday next week. But you just watched Dattitude. You got your fill-in for at least 48 hours or so. A reminder to subscribe to our Dattitude YouTube page and click the little bell to receive notifications when we go on the air live. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can always find a replay of the show on NOLA.com/sports. We thank all the commenters today. We thank everyone who enjoys being a part of the show. We will tell you hello. We hope you come back on Wednesday, and we will see you then. Take it easy, my friends.
If you're looking for the latest scoop and in-depth interviews on the Saints, the NFL, the Pelicans, LSU, along with the best bets of the week, then lucky you. Along with high-powered, in-the-know guests who cover our teams, Jim Derry brings plenty of Dattitude. And he'll always tell you the way it is, or at least the way he thinks it is.